Our speaker this morning is Matt Austerklein, Hazzanut Matt Austerklein. He's the cantor of Congregation Anshai Torah in Dallas, which is in America. He has also recently completed his PhD dissertation in Jewish studies at Halle-Wittenberg University, where he studied early modern cantorial history. He's the editor of 3 books and the author of Beyond the Music. Now you remember that Elias mentioned Beyond the Music yesterday, and he also writes a weekly Jewish column and Jewish music column on Substack. He lives in Plano, Texas, with his wife, Rabbi Elyssa Joy, whose birthday was last week. And their 2 children, Georgie and Beatrice. Matt, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. To begin our exploration of Hazzanut, we are going to begin with song. Rabbi Elyssa, take it away. Hey. One of the most iconic pieces of cantorial music, to get your mind into what the mysteries are that we are about to explore. This full piece includes some of those things we come to expect from Hazzanut, right? Melody, improvisation, melismas, a bit of zoging, right, in the recitative in the middle, speak singing, portamento, and that crying classic Eastern European sound. We cantors speak about Hazzanut with reverence as a time-honored traditional art form. This is exactly when the screensaver goes on. There we go. Whose liturgical melodies, whose new stuff goes all the way back to the revelations of Mount Sinai, or if not to Mount Sinai, then at least to the Beis Hamikdash, right, to the temple in Jerusalem. It feels good for us to feel that our music is old. Why? There's so much new music. Why does our provenance matter? One of the reasons is that we are having old music like Hazzanut gives us a sense of mission, that we are links in a great musical chain, right? This is true in Judaism for music, just like it is in Halakha for Jewish law, right? In Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers begin with this same idea. Moshe קיבל תורה מסיני, ומסרה ליהושע, יהושע לזקנים, וזקנים לנביאים, ונביאים מסרוה לאנשי כנסת הגדולה. Moses received the Torah from Mount Sinai, transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. So too, for the musical revelations which have been passed down to us. This principle of the ongoing transmission of Ashkenazi nusach and culture was embraced at first by the Maharil, Rabbi Jacob Millet, in that great 14th century medieval rabbi, cantor, and author, who ruled for all Ashkenazi Jews to preserve their traditional local melodies. Now, the Maharil is considered the main exponent, the first guy to orient us in this traditional way towards Ashkenazi minhag, but his sentiments were echoed again in explicit terms for Chazanim by the late 16th century. That's right. I was about to say Rabbi David Ulmo, but it's not Elmo. It's Ulmo. This guy.
It could have been worse.
No, it was on break.
This is the Chazonim.
Yeah, well, you'll see in a second.
No, other one.
Rabbi David Ulmo, not Elmo, was a Prague-born rabbi in the 16th century in Ulm, right here in Germany, but he moved to Prague. He was a cantor and a rabbi and a klezmer musician. And this is his manuscript guide on the left, Sefer Michtam David in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And it is a fascinating manuscript which illuminates in detail some of the earliest explicit descriptions of klezmer playing, including the names in Yiddish of some of their melodies, and is one of the first articulations of the principles of Ashkenazi Hazzanut, including the age and antiquity of Nusach. And by the way, on the right, this is actually a etching of actual klezmorim from Prague in 1716. So just to give you a real picture, written out from a parade, a communal parade. So, but he was already in Prague 115 plus years before. This is what he says in Michtam David. He says, we must make our prayers with holiness and purity, using our old melodies of Shabbat and Chagim, of Shabbat and festivals, which without a doubt, he writes, were established by the Tanaim and the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Talmud, especially the melodies of the Yamim HaNoraim, the high holidays. He's writing this circa 1600 to 1605. And to these, some cantors, he writes, have come to add, intermixing and exchanging some foreign tunes between those pious melodies. It makes my soul grieve. Now, what does this tell us? It not only confirms that there is a canon of traditional Ashkenazi synagogue melodies by the late Middle Ages, right, with the Maharil, but that just a century and a half later, the melodies of the high holidays, by circa 1600, could be considered by religious Jews as dating back a third of their 1,000 years, somehow, to the age of the Talmudic rabbis, the age of Chazal. But how much can we really know about how old Jewish music is, let alone Chazanus, absence the use of a TARDIS? Can we take Rabbi Ulmo for granted that high holiday melodies are 2,000 years old, or is digging into the mysterious origins of Chazanus more like exploring layers of sedimentary rock, where we can see different aspects from different historical events which have settled into our traditions? So let's go back in time for the next 35 to 40 minutes and see what stories we can uncover together about the mysterious origins of Hazzanut. And with that, I will begin with some music. Adonai Elohei Israel, Shum Mecharon Apecho, Vinachem Shum This is the oldest notated piece of Ashkenazic synagogue music. It was discovered by musicologist Dr. Martha Sternmacher a decade ago and actually presented here at the ECA, I believe in 2015, at the Magnified and Sanctified Conference in Leeds. It was in Britain, right? Alex will be able to confirm. It is written in a 15th century, that's 1400s, ladies and gentlemen, Latin manuscript held in the library of the Prague Metropolitan Chapter at the Prague Castle in the Czech Republic. It is written in a Bohemian, for those of you who know a little Gregorian chant, this is a Bohemian rhombic style notation of chant, and it is a melody for the responsorial Ashkenazic piyut for the liturgy of Tachanun. So Dr. Stellmacher, in her paper given here, believes that this was most likely written down by a fascinated Christian who notated the prayers of a Jew while seeking to understand something of their liturgy, theology, and sound. Christians writing down Jewish melodies? How odd! But of course, the Christians invented sheet music itself. The origins of Western musical notation came at the behest of the Emperor Charlemagne, or Charles I, who needed a way to or Karl de Groß, in Deutschland, yeah. He needed a way to standardize Christian melodies across his vast empire, which extended to France, Germany, and northern Italy. While this evolved into Gregorian chant with its familiar bar line and staff, like we know from Western music, the very first musical notations were actually from his era, were called neumes. Yes, some people know you have seen neumes before. They appear above and below words in order to aid the singer with remembering whether the melody goes up or down. Now we are living, by the way, through history, because just last week, the Robb collection, which is like an auction house in Pennsylvania, just claims to have discovered the most ancient, the oldest version of this neume form of notation that Charlemagne commissioned. And it dates from the late 800s, when Charlemagne's grandkids were still alive. So, but of course, looking at this sort of thing should be familiar to us, right? The whole idea of neumes, because it's also in use in another context over in Tiberia, over in Tiberias, right? Where Jews there are notating Torah cantillations in the system we know now as Tahamei Mikra, or trope. Now, this technology of neumes, it has vastly different appearances and oral traditions and very different evolutions. The neume system eventually evolves in Christianity into Western music. But for us, we stick with neumes, we stick with our own, and they become trope. These are different contexts, but similar techniques for notating music applied to different languages and cultures. Now let's get back to our Tachanun. When I sang this, it sounded abyssally like Gregorian chant, even though I'm not really a Gregorian chant singer. And that's because all of the information that this transcription provides is just the notes. I don't for a minute believe that late medieval Hazzanut sounded like pure vowel monks. The manuscript itself was Hebrew was faulty because the transcriber was not a Hebrew speaker, he was just a transcriber. Does nevertheless show us that Hazzanut was sung liturgy by the 15th century and had some melismatic elements already by this point. Now, the connection between Gregorian chant and the melodies of the synagogue has long been debated, right? And anyone ever heard people say, oh, right, we're all from Gregorian chant and early Christian stuff comes from the temple, and so does our stuff. If you read Eric Werner's book, A Sacred Bridge, who attempted to make this case in the 1980s, he pointed between similarities between some of the oldest Ashkenazi melodies and some of the oldest church melodies, like this. And this is an old Eli Schleifer example, right? So he'll make this example. High Holiday, the High Holiday Mari service, and the Gregorian hymn from the 8th century, Iste Confessor. Now, this connection between early church music and synagogue melodies has long been in debate, with many scholars hoping that they will make a connection that will lead them back to those pure melodies of the Beis Hamikdash that everyone wants to anchor their tradition in. Yet this is more hope than fact, at least I'll say. Truthfully, Gregorian hymns are different from Jewish ones. You can actually, Daniel Katz, who often comes here and lectures at the ECA, they follow different rules of psalmody. And in fact, Jewish melodies often have far more variety than their Christian counterparts. So I'm not going to weigh in further on this point, really. The one thing I'll say, this is the main point that's important. Whereas church music in the medieval period is standardized by notation, by writing it down, Jews do not have this. We are still, at this period, passing our melodies down orally. You know, music for Ashkenazi Jews is Torah Shebe'al Peh. And it continues to be Torah Shebe'al Peh up until about really the 17th and 18th century. But with no notation to provide exact rhythms, Baal Peh music is naturally improvised and is naturally varied. And we can demonstrate this thanks to another old Ashkenazic melody that I believe has been sung here at an ECA convention, written down by yet another curious Christian. Now, this was rediscovered by Israel Adler in the 1980s. This is the oldest Shabbos Zemer that we have. It dates to, it was written down between 1505 and 1518 by a curious Christian who apparently came for Shabbos dinner. I will sing this whole thing for you as it was notated. It was notated, as you can see, in full. And this is, again, this is the Christian's transcription, and this is his early notation of the, so you can see, Hazzanut, Bashir, Rachem, and Ibaneh are all there.
What about
This is written down between 1505 and 1518, but we're going to see that it's probably
from right to links, no? To left.
Yeah, he did it well. He did it right to left. Thank God, right? Before that, we were thinking about that as Jews.
Some right to the fore.
Yeah, very good. So this transcription that I'm going to sing for you was done by Avery Gospiel, who spoke here, I think in Hanover 2 years ago, and she performs this. So I'm going to sing this to you, and you'll notice that there are slight differences, because this is an oral tradition. It is not regulated by the strictures of chanting. So Mishelo Halu Borchu Emunai Sovanu Veosalu Kidvar Adonai Tzur Mishelo Halu Borchu Emunai Sovanu Veosalu Kidvar Adonai Azon Esolam Eloheinu Avinu Ochanu Eslachem Oveyeinu Shosinu Alkeinu Delishmo Unhadenu Befinu Omanu Ve'aninu Kein Kadosh Adonai Beshir Bekol Toda Devorek Neloheinu Aeretz Kemdat Le'Fil Avuseinu Mazun Ve'Tzedach Ispia De'Nafsheinu Astogovar Aleinu Ve'Yebes Adonai Rachem Echastech Ha'olam Chatzureinu Atzion Mishpatodek Zevum Esti Parsenu Uvein David Avdecha Yavu Ve'Yigaleinu Ve'Ruach Abeinu Meshiach Adonai Yibane Hamikdash Yitzion Temade Nashir Shir Kadosh Uvinno Na'ale Harav Mananik Dachis Barach Ve'Yisade Atos Yahin Male Virkas Abonai. So thank you. So what do we know about Hazzanut so far? We're in 1510. We know that it emerges from an oral music culture of Ashkenazic Jews who pass on their melodies from generation to generation with natural variation, even on strophic forms, as they are not hemmed in by the strictures of a written set system like Western notation. Like Artachanun, and even in the most, from Artachanun to even the most regular of strophic melodies like Sur Michelot. But you should know, and this is super important, Hazzanut develops in a world where it is, the Siddur is not the only sung book. The Siddur, I'll repeat this, the Siddur is not the only sung book that people have. In this age, in late medieval age, and especially in the early modern period, when you get a lot of print, books and poems are sung aloud via contrafact. If you want to hear King Arthur in medieval Yiddish, which you can, you would take the manuscript or book and sing it benigen X to a pre-existing tune. We do this with Adon Olam all the time today, but it is a very, very old thing, not just for the prayer book, but for news, for poems, for long epics, for laments, and for books especially. But we're going to demonstrate this because we actually have evidence of it precisely. Our very own tune, Sur Michelot, that we just sang, we know was used for a contrafact for a Yiddish poem, the Lied of die Sreife von Venedig, a satirical Purim poem describing Jews behaving very badly at a fire in Venice in 1510. Anyone ever heard of Elia Bochur? He's an Italian grammarian, right? He writes grammar books and also comedy and poetry. He writes in the early 16th century in ottava rima, in an acclaimed Italian form. He writes this poem in Yiddish, Die Lied of die Sreife von Venedig. But at the top, what is written? Benigen Sur Michelot. So he's writing the Ashkenazic Nigun Sur Michelot, again Avery Gospel, this is the result of her research, that we actually can place this nigun is probably an orally passed down nigun and probably dips back into the late 15th century itself, right? And it's, you hear it, it's analogous to sort of German strophic forms. So I will sing for you a little how you might apply this melody to the opening of the Sreife Lied, which you can see here. This is a picture of the fire of Venice in 1510, documented historical event. This is Elia Bochur's manuscript, or a copy of it, and this is what it might have sounded like. My old, this by the way, this is old Western Yiddish, which is a lot more like German, which I'm not fluent, but I will do my best. Nun will ich ein Witzig singen mit meinem bösen Chor, wenn die neu geschehen Dingen, die jedermann wissen soll, von der Macke und der Magepe, die das gewesen, das Dosigmo, zu Venedig in der Sreife, asher Sore Pabunai. Es war sein großen Jomen, der Dobrenterial, von Tarpoid und von Jenlomen, von Jungen, Juden, Jung und Alt. Juden ruft Juden, das Juden, dass sie kämen bald, wo's gerecht auf Lüden, dem Mann Abonai. So weiter. So we see again how people are applying oral melodies not just to the Siddur, but to other books. It's normal to sing books out loud. Because remember, for a long time, there's not many of them to go around, right? So why would you be selfish and read just for yourself? So again, this is a big thing you should know about how Hazzanut evolves. Oh, sorry, I didn't give you, this is the translation of what is going on in that song. Yet this oral Ashkenazi tradition may be even more porous than we think. Oral traditions are promiscuous because the ear hears whether it likes to or not, right? And the German streets were filled. Germany was a very, very loud place, even though, alles in Ordnung now, theoretically. The German streets were filled with processions and mini singers and civic musicians and street songs. And so let me take you now to one more Shabbos Zemer, which holds a possible secret to the origins of Hazzanut, and for this we're relying on the research of Dr. Naomi Cohen-Zentner. Some of you may know her from Israel. She works very much on modern Israeli music. Right now she's working on musical responses to 10-7. But she did some wonderful research on this Zemer called Mekadesh Shvi. As Dr. Zentner has pointed out, the Ashkenazi melody of Kol Mekadesh appears in I think 6 or 7 17th century Catholic hymn books from Hildesheim, Köln, Würzburg, Mainz, and Prague. It is set to the orally passed down tune of the Brüder Weizthum. This is a well-known, at that time, 16th, 17th century melody. And Jews were singing this Shabbos song to a Christian hymn. Is actually borne out by a rabbinic witness. And usually we can tell things are going on because rabbis say, don't do this anymore. And indeed, if you look in the Minhagim book of Frankfurt by Yusbahan, Nördlingen, he writes, it is forbidden to sing non-Jewish melodies like Kol Mekadesh, for things like Kol Mekadesh and Birchot Titim on Friday nights or in the synagogue. So this melody has been passed down in the Ashkenazic tradition with variation, but matches up roughly as a variant of the old hymn we have here. Etc., etc. But Dr. Zender applies actually in her research, this is the kicker, this is what really gets me. She applied in her research that the motifs of this melody are actually analogous to the motifs from the Shabbat Shacharit service itself. Now I'm going to sing Kol Mekadesh the way I know it, some of you may know it, a slight variation of this. Kol Mekadesh Shevi Karu Eloi, Osham Shabbos Kadas Michal Eloi, Skar Me'ol Abibol roughly, which maps on to this hymn, but also maps on to Shabbos morning. B'fi sharim tisalon, uvdivrei tzadikim tisburach, u'milshon chasidim tislomah, u'bekerev kiddushim tiskodash.
Also Kel.
Also what?
Kel.
Also Kel Adon, right? Exactly, it's Shabbos morning. So what this means, right?
Ava
Rabba.
Rabba, the Musa.
Rabba mode.
No, this is Shabbos morning. This is in minor. We have no Frankish yet. Yeah, Shulchan Aruch, Shabbat morning. What does this mean? It implies that not only is Nusach influenced heavily by the inner motivic structures of German song, but one of the distinctive things about Ashkenazic chant is taking pre-existing melodies and stretching them out over large amounts of text. We're applying the same structures to Nusach, to extending the same melodic structures over the text that we need. And you know what this makes sense? Because this is exactly what Ashkenazi Jews did with their secular books and poems that they wrote out loud. So we're seeing the taking of German materials, and we're seeing them stretched and applied and molded for Jewish purposes. Again, this makes one of the secrets of Hazzanut not antiquity, not necessarily that it goes back to the age of the Talmud, but that it's adaptability. It's baking in and adapting the raw materials from the world around it by applying and even subordinating them to Jewish purposes. Now let's have some fun. We're going to get into the early modern era, and this is where my PhD research comes in. We get to the 17th and 18th centuries. This is where the action picks up. Jews grow gigantic settlements in East Central Europe. Bohemia, especially Prague, Moravia, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And in these places, Jews experience new prosperity, they open their minds to new learnings, and they experience huge changes in culture, prayer, and music. And one of the biggest parts of that is the printing press, right? Completely changes Jewish culture, and I think it has a similar impact on the worship, whether on Christians, as it does for Jews. You see, the medieval age is the age of the manuscript. In the medieval period, who owns the books? It is the church, right? We've got these nice praying people. It is the clergy that by and large create the manuscripts. They are the scribes, and they are also the only ones who can interpret the Bible and lead the prayers. They are priests, right? So there's a distinct hierarchy. There's a distinct division of labor. But with the advent of print, now everybody can have a book. And the world starts in that moment to look like everyone is a miniature version of a priest, right? If the priest was the only one who had the book for hundreds of years, and now everyone gets a book, obviously the theological result is that everyone looks like a priest. Everyone looks like a priest. And this has a huge social, theological, and musical change.
Mamlechet HaKohanim.
Mamlechet HaKohanim, Mamlechet HaDavening also, we'll see. I would argue the same thing happens to us as Judaism reaches the age of print. That is exactly, you also get angry priests because they're very angry. That is exactly what is reported in this book from Prague in 1620. Sefer Lev-Tov, it's in Western Yiddish, it's in Old German, Old Judeo-German. This is what Sefer Lev-Tov says happens. Quote, in the past, by the way, this is a book that Glickle of Hamel memorized. This is a very well-known book. Wow. In the past, there were not so many machzorim before printing came along. In the whole, there were not more than 2 or 3 in the whole synagogue, and no one spoke from them other than the chazan. And in the past, they had chazanim who were heads of yeshivas and understood well what they said. The others all, you can take this home to your shuls, the others all listened to the cantor as he spoke, so that no one who did not understand said anything. But now, he continues, some have a large machzor in front of them and shout louder than the chazan and speak and do not know what they are saying, like a bird that cries or a hound that barks and does not know what it is shouting. It is a wondrous thing that our beautiful, lovely prayers are, this is 1620, not 1920, 1620. Our beautiful, lovely prayers are brought with ignorance and lack of understanding, and that we have to shout and are unable to listen to a word the chazan says. Would it not be better that we should keep quiet and listen to the chazan? Because generally, every chazan understands what he says. And when we listen to the chazan word for word, we will be yotzei. We will fulfill our obligation. End quote. So what we're seeing is the total subversion of the prayer service hierarchy. Printed prayer books in the 16th century are among the first mass-produced books for the Jewish population. And they're egged on by actually mystical and grammar-loving elites in Poland and Lithuania who wanted everyone to say the words right. But this has an unintended effect. Just like the printed Bible makes every Christian look like a priest, the printed prayer book makes every davener look like a chazan. Exactly. Because now they all have their own copy of what used to be the chazan's exclusive material. Right? Everyone now has their own exclusive chazanic material. As Lev-Tov demonstrates, this causes a cacophony. Right? This causes a cacophony in shul in the Eastern European synagogue, and which probably causes cantors to be much louder to be heard over the cacophony, and indeed creating a sacred cacophony that we today know as davening. As davening. Right? Davening, to me, and when I see this history, is the sound of cantorial democracy brought on by the democratization of the cantor's formerly exclusive tool, the siddur. Yes?
This is brilliant. I have a question about the verb that is used. You keep saying that the chazan says.
Yes.
Is it strach?
It's zog. In that there is a distinction both in the minhag literature between was der chazan zogt and was der chazan singt. Right? Which means zogging, eventually we see, it's not zogging like that, but it's that there is metrical song and then there is generalized liturgy. I haven't done a lot of research into sort of the musicalization of the service, where we get, the forms of where zogging becomes basically code for nusach as opposed to a nigun, like nusach and nigun basically, but that's the basic distinction I'm making. Is zog and zink, nusach and nigun.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. Another development in this period is the growth in East Central Europe, is the building of great synagogues, most of which were constructed from stone masonry using vernacular Italian church design. These great synagogues were created to accommodate larger groups of worshippers coming to shul. There were growing Jewish quarters in East Central Europe, including larger women's galleries as well. Between this increase in size and the change of building material to more echo-prone stone and higher ceilings, the grand aesthetics of the synagogue necessarily expand to include grander sounds as well. Someone in this room, by the way, was telling me that Notre Dame, like the origins of polyphony, are actually somewhat a function of Notre Dame's very, very high and cavernous echo effect. So we have to imagine that Hazzanut evolves as a response as well to changes in the height and size and the echo and the building material of the synagogue itself, especially for a larger kehillah. So far we're seeing Hazzanut emerge out of the tradition of old orally transmitted sounds with improvisation, as well as melodies from the European street, which eventually get louder and more cacophonous as everyone gets their own prayer book and thinks that they're their own chazan, and also from an environment where the siddur is one of many books that are sung out loud. But now we get even more interesting and funny. See, this is a moment in time that perhaps us chazanim can appreciate. It is when the kehillah finally gets the upper hand over the rabbanim. That is because rabbis have one thing they have not had before, and that is called a contract. And when rabbis have a contract, that means they have a boss. And they don't have the last say on everything. Now we may think that in Poland, Lithuania, the great yeshivas, right, of the Maharshal, right, and of the Rema, right, that these were great poskim with great power, but actually they had they had relational power, they had book power, but they did not have as much positional power as they did before. There was a shift between the king backing the rabbis directly in Poland, Lithuania, to the local nobility dealing directly with the local kehillas, and it gave the local community more power over the rabbi, especially in who they got to choose as a cantor. And so many rabbis get very frustrated that these communities are somehow choosing musical cantors. After all, when the prayer book is fixed, we have two big changes, not just everyone looking like a chazan. First of all, the classical medieval cantorial art of writing piyut, right? First, what's the first time we have the word Hazzanut? It's Hazzanut Yanai, the ancient Paitan. And so the old medieval task of the Chazan was to compose piyutim. That is drying up, especially with the printing press. So if I can't be a slam poet in shul anymore, what's left for creativity? It must be
Music.
the music. It's the only outlet left. By the way, in the church, this is also probably true with the standardization of their liturgy as well. Furthermore, now that the siddur is set and printed for everybody, what don't you have to do with the siddur anymore? Yes, you don't have to memorize it anymore. It's right there. You also don't have to be as religiously literate as someone who can write their own piyutim. So the candidate pool opens up a little bit, right? We can have, the liturgy is no longer a moving target. All you have to do is sing it well and with kavanah. You can have more people who have maybe less religious background and maybe more musical talent involved in the execution of the service. So in a way, I would say it lowers the bar. Not for the execution of chazanas, but for who could possibly become a chazan. And so, we have communities being empowered to appoint a whole slew of non-traditional candidates, including those with yichus, or primarily, or beautiful voices primarily, to fill the creative void and become cantors. And the rabbis, for all the great chochmas, are powerless to stop it. Thus, the Maharshal writes, quote, the Rabbi Shlomo Luria from the 16th century writes, "The law requires the rabbi should choose the cantor from among his students, but should the rabbi dare to exercise that right, his recommendation would be rejected by the congregation. It would be futile for the rabbi to protest. The community is retained for themselves and withhold from the rabbi the power of appointment in order that the cantor should remain accountable to them alone and free from the control of the rabbi. As a consequence, the piety of the reader is subordinated to pleasant voice and clear diction." And this is not the only complaint from poskim of that era. But why are communities asking for more musical cantors? It's not just because they can, it's not just for entertainment or honoring people with nepotism, right? It's because this is a moment of great spiritual and religious need. We have in the form of Lurianic Kabbalah. And it is spreading throughout the Jewish world, into the Ashkenazi world this way, from Sfa through Venice and then to Prague. Prague is the first place really where Ashkenazi Lurianic Kabbalah comes. And it has a big product that we happen to like called Kabbalat Shabbat. And indeed, remember Rabbi Ulmo from the beginning? His whole thing about cantors, the main purpose of his book is advocating the practice of Kabbalat Shabbat before it is normal. The first Kabbalat Shabbat is printed in 1615. He's in only the manuscript era. He is a dealer. He is a dealer of Kabbalah Shabbos and Kabbalah to the masses. So this is a moment of great need, and indeed, when Kabbalat Shabbat comes around to these cities and then to Nikolsburg and on, it happens to come with musical instruments. Right? If you have been to Prague, you've heard of the Prague musical instrument service that was before sundown with the organ, not this big organ, but a portable organ, portative organ. Because the mystics say, Idu et Hashem b'simcha, right? We need to bring joy, we need to elevate ourselves, and what better way to do that than with more music? And not just more music, but new types of music. What am I, on the top, what am I looking at? What piece is this? Oh, I already gave you the answer, it's up there. Sorry. What piece is this?
Tehillim, sorry.
The?
Tehillim.
This is a piece of Tehillim, what is the book that it's from? Not the Tehillim, but the music. This is a copy of Salomon Rossi's Hebrew Madrigals. This is a part book. Remember, we get Rossi in 4-part, they did not have that. Everyone got their own part. So this is a quinto, this is the fifth voice in the Salomon Rossi part book. But what do we have here? We have a nice Ashkenazi man trying to read this part book. This is a copy that's in the Bodleian Library of one of Salomon Rossi's madrigals, and it had two Ashkenazi owners before the chief rabbi of Prague got it, Rabbi David Oppenheim. One of whom was a chazan in Nikolsburg in Moravia, and who actually the head of the community there. And here he is, you know what he's doing? Because remember, Jews have no idea how to read sheet music. So what do they have to do? They have to find the second book. What's the second book that you need to read sheet music? You need Zarlino, or Fuchs, right? You need a music treatise, right? You need a music treatise, which means these guys probably had to read Latin at some point, possibly, or German. Definitely. But here he is. These are standard exercises, and this is solfege in Yiddish, everybody. This is what you have to do in order to learn sheet music in the late 17th century. Is you got to find a Christian music treatise and find this what they call chokhmat musika, right? This is the science of music, and you have to do all the exercises, you know, at the beginning. This is a nice Jew trying to go through it and learn what to do.
That's a C case.
But,
Which case? C?
I think this is a C clef. Yeah.
C case, yeah.
This is a C case, yeah, and this is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. So he's doing all of these the psalmization. These are called mutation psalmization exercises for those of you in the early music world. A little Baroque stuff. That's what this is. But there's also something happening here, not just an Ashkenazi cantor, and then for him, I think this guy on the bottom is a printer in Wilhelmsdorf. Not just reading music and using a music treatise to do so, but an Ashkenazi Jew writing down a melody from somebody else. This is, he writes, this is Israel Adler's transcription, the notation of a holy for Rosh Chodesh and Rabbi Aaron Hazzanut Brisk. And there it is. The guy writes down someone else's melody. We think it's normal to notate melodies. It is not normal for Jews to notate melodies before 1700. He says this might be the first time that I can think of that a Jew notates someone else's melody other than Rab Shabtai Bas, but he writes down the Sephardic Azeshir Moshe, but that's a different thing. Again, this is new. We're entering an era which is the launch of not just musical cantors, but cantors who begin to think that chokhmat musika, reading, that knowing the Western rules of music, might be a meaningful technology for sacred composition, right? This is one of the first Ashkenazic, self-consciously written down compositions that we have for getting closer to God. So for this cantor, the Rossi part book validates a vision of Jews as people who actually can wield chokhmat musika. Even though we didn't invent this writing system, this system of Western notation, we can wield it for spiritual purpose. So with cantors empowered by communities to be more musical, and the world of print expanding cantorial canons of knowledge, and the pull of mysticism on people's souls, we have entered a new era of cantorial innovation in early modern Europe. And these musical cantors hereafter bring on a few more things here that we can recognize from Hazzanut. Number one, speed davening. I often joke that many Jewish people actually worship two gods, El Adon and El Shaon. The Lord and the clock. However funny, it is also true, because however much the cantor wants to sing, we are only human and there's Kiddush at the end. And it was true back then. And so cantors begin to sing long, extended melismatic passages, as is their wont, and then you have to speed up to make up the time afterwards. So you get complaints like this one from Sefer Rishit Bikurim in the circa 1700. It says, quote, on Tisha B'Av, the cantors sing joyful songs and psalms to a sorrowful heart, and for the prayers of the weekday, they sing, I'm quoting this in my translation, they sing for an extended time on the vowel ah. Like in the Yerushalayim Ircha. And afterwards they say several blessings in one breath. 1700, not 1900 guys, 1700. So zogin, davening fast, then as now, is actually a 300-year-old technique for making time to sing. And in traditional Hazzanut, being able to zog is a very important skill in service of both the Lord and the clock. But the last major innovation of the 17th and 18th centuries are the mishorim. These are bands or two or more singers, often at minimum a bas, which is a low voice, and a zinger, which is either a boy or a high voice male, who alternates singing with the cantor in the service. This is not like a typical choir, this is not harmony. This is like passing the baton more. There might be one little chord at the end, but it's mostly hanging off between parts. And it becomes a marker of Ashkenazic services in the age of cantorial innovation. My contention in my research is that this actually begins in Prague specifically, where there is a huge exposure because the intellectual climate in Prague is very open. Even compared to Poland and Lithuania, the Maharal and all his contemporaries are reading very, very widely, and there's a big printing industry there. And indeed, in 1600, Rabbi Ulmo writes, the Chazanim around me have said, I have studied the Torah, I will now go study Chochmei HaMot, Shezeh Muzik. I'm going to go, now I've studied Torah, and the Torah of Hashem Jewish people, I'm now going to go study the non-Jews' music. Now they use the word Musik, like the German term. Now it becomes the Yiddish term. By 1700, the Mishorim art form has become, it's all over Western Ashkenaz, and some of the evidence we have of its aesthetic, however, comes from very, very confused Christians. You've probably heard this before. This is just a manuscript, which I'm not going to sing, but again, this is a Malchuscha, and again, it looks like a Baroque etude. But I'll read Charles Burney, an Englishman who visited the Great Ashkenazic Synagogue in Amsterdam in 1775, said this of the service with Mishorim, quote, I'm excerpting it, little bits of it. At my first entrance, one of the priests was chanting a part of the service in a kind of an ancient canto fermo, and responses were made by the congregation in a manner that resembled the hum of bees. After this, three of the sweet singers of Israel, which it seems are famous here, and much attended by Christians as well as Jews, began singing in a kind of jolly modern melody, sometimes in unison, sometimes in parts, to a kind of tal de rol instead of words, which seemed to me very farcical. One of the voices was a falsetto, more like the upper part of a bad vox humana, stopping an organ than a natural voice. The second of these was a very vulgar tenor, and the third a baritono. It is impossible for me to divine what ideas the Jews annexed to themselves annexed to this vociferation. I shall therefore neither pronounce it to be good nor bad in itself. I shall only say that it is very unlike what we Christians are used to in divine service. So what Bernie is describing here is the classic Cantor Mishorim style. It is the main style of Ashkenazic synagogue music the world over from 1740 to 1840 for an entire century. And this is the century where cantors can compose. Really starting with the Hanoverian Compendium from 1744 is the evidence where we have real cantorial manuscripts where cantors are composing whole pinkasim of their compositions for shul. We even have a picture. I have a picture from Schwarze in Germany in 1767, a cantor with his little book of music that he's singing from. So this is the era of cantorial music literacy. And often, and if you see, he talks about it being imitative of musical instruments. But even that is much, much older, at least 175 years older. Rabbi Umo in 1600 says over and over that the cantors in Prague in the turn of the 17th century are using melodies from the klezmers all the time in the synagogue. I won't replicate them here, but I recommend you, by the way, to Daniel Katz's work on Michaud on the style. He's done analysis of some of these manuscripts, which is very excellent. Now, this florid style may also be influenced by cantorial training in musical instruments. Many cantors actually became violinists, or, like Rabbi Umo, were klezmers first. But all these Baroque styles for chazanas, which were standard until the early 19th century, were to be disciplined and brought in line by Western harmony with the rise of the choral reforms of Jewish modernity. Solomon Zulzer, the author of Ein Kamocha, and most of our Torah service, at least in the States, and then you guys have more or less for Barzilai, more Zulzer, so less Zulzer. Joined other synagogue composers, leaving behind the old florid ways of 18th century Hazzanut, bringing artistic and harmonic sensibilities of 19th century Catholic church music and Lieder. So to conclude, Hazzanut as we know it today continues to evolve. By the way, the first time I did this talk, it was at Sinai Temple with Marcus, so that's why he's here. He's a wonderful chazan. Hazzanut as we know it today continues to evolve as a hybrid of these Western sensibilities and the old style of extended melismas and Baroque ornaments, combined with both medieval melodies and the unique flavor of Eastern European Jewish music. This recent history is more well known and includes the history of klezmer and folk song and Tin Pan Alley, stuff that we see in modern chazanas, including Sheyabadi Beis HaMikdash today. But what we discover when we look back to our origins is really the cantor it being a bellwether for changes in our whole society. As we review the origins of chazanas, we see times when communities were empowered to consider deep questions. How shall we serve God with joy? How do our sacred music professionals enhance that opportunity? How can we reach Hashem through complex ascendant musical beauty? Chazanas is not built just on sedimentary layers of Jewish history, as we have seen, but on these essential questions which we must ask in every generation. Thank you very much, and I welcome, for whatever time I have, 5 minutes, questions. No chashayim. Yes.
I just noticed you omitted, in what was a very, very comprehensive, excellent presentation, that you omitted the whole line of thought, Glantz, Edelson, the Musaf, and the origins of the Chazan. It goes back to it goes back to Greek, Aegean tetrachords, harkening back to the shir of the Beit HaMikdash. Is that theory still in vogue, or is it essentially been abandoned?
So I will say yes and no. What I think is very, very worthy about what you're saying, Nelia, is that what I did not do, which people like Joe Levine and Edelson and Werner have done, is break down how trope and its motivic structures relate to the structures of Ashkenazic melody. That is one big hole through what I've done, which is a very, very important. However, I will say that Edelson's general theory of going back is is not taken at face value, because he was very, very influenced actually by the same types of thought that Richard Wagner was influenced by, in that there is this kind of Volksgeist, right? This is this folk spirit that goes for the German people, and Edelson actually wrote positively of Wagner, but also for the Jewish people, going all the way back. And he was trying to really have that, follow that whole zerima throughout Jewish history and Jewish music history. It is a very forced and a very sort of, has a certain ideas about race and peoplehood. And so there's a lot of problematizing of Edelson for that reason. But I think that you're very right on in terms of the way that the trope structure maps on to the motivic structure is a very important part of this history as well.
I know it's a lecture entirely on its own, but the Spanish, Portuguese, Western Sephardic tradition, with attaining the Baroque, I mean, that had a massive influence, but it's not on the formation of Spanish, Portuguese liturgical tropes, etc.
Yes, the influence of Baroque on, we'd say Baroque in America, but there's so many Europeans and English people here. So the influence of the Baroque on Spanish, Portuguese tradition, Western Sephardic tradition, is different than Ashkenazi. Why? It's because of class. The Portuguese come to Amsterdam and London and Belgium and Hamburg as high-class businessmen who also have not been Jews for a while. So what do? They have to create their tradition Masorah from almost Ephes. They call to their buddies across the Mediterranean or below the Mediterranean. They get Hazzanut from Morocco and from Tunisia and from Turkey. But they also self-consciously incorporate Baroque music from the salons that they attend. I remember reading a manuscript that Dr. Sarusi shared with us. It was like this. She's 1750. It's written Benigun Orlibuski. Who is Orlibuski? It's Johann Orlibusch. He's an organist. He's playing in Amsterdam, German organist, a non-Jew, playing in the salons of these Portuguese merchants. So the Baroque influence in the Spanish-Portuguese tradition is way classier. The Ashkenazim don't have that access. They are poor and they get it from the street. And actually, it is very embarrassing. My most recent article actually I wrote is about a Spanish-Portuguese Jew in London in 1715 who copies down a screed against Ashkenazi cantors in London. Why? Because they say, Mi hayudim ha'umlamlim ha'ela, he says. Who are these crazy Jews, horrible Jews? They're going to embarrass us before the... I'm sorry? Miserable, yes, that's actually the title. Yeah. Who are these miserable Jews? They're going to embarrass us in front of the Goyim and in front of themselves because they sound like Drek. So there's a class thing, because the Sephardim have only been in England 30 years more than the Ashkenazim, and they're worried that the Ashkenazim are going to take away their provisional Englishness very quickly by sounding like Ashkenazim, and like Polish Ashkenazim no less, because they were. So I hope that answers your question about the distinctions in the Sephardic piece. Last question from Alex, and then I think we have to break.
And where do we get these customs of, like, Rome is different, itself, Minhag Rome, Minhag Amsterdam, as opposed to Holland or to the rest of Italy or to the rest of the Minhag Anglia, and so on and so forth. Where do these actually were embedded in these cities? Who started them? How did it come about? And why are they different from the rest of the country?
So the evolution of minhagim is a very interesting story. Obviously, we start off with a lot of very different minhagim because German medieval tradition is very localized, right? The Maharil says he thinks that his daughter died because he used the wrong Haftorah trope from a different city, right? We're talking hyper-local for the level of minhag here, and a lot of stress. Eventually, what evolves is you look at machzorim that have this includes the minhag of Poland and Bohemia and Hungary and Moravia. It's like it's all together, and eventually that all just becomes Polish, basically. And Prague is distinct, by the way, even by 1600. And then eventually you get the Western Ashkenaz. These things all happen really with the era of print, because there's also mass migration happening after the Chmelnytsky massacres in 1648. All the Polish go west to take all of the cantorial jobs of Germany and Western Europe. And so there's a real sort of, I would say, a calcification of the Western tradition as it reacts with the Polish tradition. Many of the things that are Deutschmark, German customs, I remember reading in a German cantorial newspaper from the 1880s, are basically just old Polish customs that got adapted. There are some places like Frankfurt. Frankfurt was, it didn't let any of the Polish immigrants stay, so it stayed pretty, pretty German in its style. So this is really, it all happens in this period of migration and also of publishing books, and it just all comes into being Western and Eastern European at some point. Thank you.
Yet another brilliant presentation from Hazzanut Austerklein. Matt, thank you very much.